Hi, welcome to our next segment on Baroque painting. This time we're going to be traveling to Spain in the north. We will be looking at Baroque art and how it developed in Spain and Flanders, but unfortunately we're not going to have time to do French Baroque. And none of that is included on your AP list as well, so I'm going to have to skip over that, which is unfortunate. So here's a map, and we're going to be, focusing here and also up here as well. And the Baroque, style, again, is very dramatic and theatrical, but each region that it developed in, did it a little bit different, but it's all Baroque. So the first artist we're going to look at is an artist named Diego Rodriguez Velázquez. He was a Spanish painter who was the leading artist in the court of King Philip IV, and one of the most important painters of the Spanish Golden Age. He was an individualistic artist of the contemporary Baroque period. He was an important portrait artist, in addition to numerous renditions of scenes of historical and cultural significance. He painted scores of portraits of the Spanish royal family, other notable European figures, and commoners. So he was quite an extensive painter. The work of Diego Velázquez from 1619 shows us not only the skill of Velázquez. He was only 20 when this work was painted. It's amazing all these artists were so young, but also his already booming interest in concepts and the importance of underlying ideas in art. So this picture is known as the Water Carrier of Seville. It's a work of modernist painting because it encapsulates a moment of everyday Spanish life and freezes it in time. So this goes back to Italian Baroque when we looked at Caravaggio and this idea of these genre scenes and, artists depicting everyday life and not just mythological subjects and historical subjects. The water carrier was an important figure in Spain during the time period. It shows a basic need, water being supplied by a local man. Typically, the poorer areas would have been built in valleys nearer to water sources, whereas the most affluent people could afford more extravagant homes in the hillsides. This created a problem because the rich people were not near a running water source, and so this created a need for water carriers who would haul the great jugs from whatever source up the hills and to serve their goods and supply them to the aristocratic citizens. So it's also more, if you look closely, and maybe you've noticed, so it's also not just a genre scene, but look at the depictions of the men. Can you notice a pattern or anything about it? Well, it really depicts also the three ages of man. So when we look at these three figures, we see a little boy, we see more of an adult man, maybe middle-aged, and then we see an older man. And so, there's some symbolism and other ideas being focused into this painting as well. Let's look at some details of the painting. Hopefully one thing that strikes you is the incredible realistic detail of the pots and the reflection of light on them, especially this one. I mean, you can almost sense, I don't know if you've ever looked at pottery, but, lots of pots have a glaze, and you can really get that sense, that sort of surface texture on this pot, and then sort of the coiled method that might have been used to create this pot. So very realistic detail. So in addition to the three stages of a man's life, the water carrier also comments on the progression of life and the inevitability of death. So here we see the three jugs and their sort of allegorical representation. And, they sort of go along with the three ages of the men in the work as well, and their social standing. So if we look, the young boy is given the clear glass by the oldest man, the water carrier himself, The young boy's glass is clear and represents a purity of body and mind, which is bestowed by the elder. The boy's eyes gaze at the tattered garment of the old man. So let me kind of go back so you can kind of see that whole composition. And art historians think that this shows his thoughts even in youth, that he's already sort of thinking about his fate of old age and death. So that's one interpretation. Here's a detail of the three men. The middle-aged man in the center is shown with the least amount of detail because he is the most active, which blurs him in the background. He is represented during the busiest part of a man's life, which is constantly striving and working, as represented by his drinking of the glass, as well as his forward body position, which directly faces and questions the viewer. And also, too, when you look at the different portraits Velázquez has painted, he's also kind of showing off that he can do different types of portraits. Here we have the three-quarter view of the boy, we have a frontal view, and then we have the profile of the water carrier. Getting back to the whole composition, the water carrier himself is the largest of the three figures and jugs, and he takes up the most amount of space in the composition. He emanates strength and wisdom through years of tribulation and tests, which he has overcome to reach this age. His hair and beard are neatly cropped, showing the modernist focus on the importance of order, rationality, and science that we see starting to develop during this time period. The man looks down to the young boy with a calm, determined look of patience as the boy inspects and learns about that which the water carrier knows from years of experience to be good. So again, it's not, it is an everyday scene, but it also, has, different symbolisms and metaphors for life and death and, growing up. And so it's, when you look at these pictures, they definitely have a much more meaning than what you might think when you initially look at them. So this is probably one of the most famous paintings by Velázquez. It's entitled Las Miñones. And, again, he was a very famous and prolific court painter. He had a very long career. He also did historical, scenes as well. We don't have time to look at that, so I'm sort of jumping ahead and looking at some of the paintings that he did for the court and for the royal family. And so this is a work that is complex. It has a very mysterious composition that raises a lot of questions about reality and illusion. Again, we see the use of the mirror in the background, and it creates an uncertain relationship between the viewer and the figures depicted. Because of these complexities, Las Miñones has been one of the most widely analyzed works in Western painting. By this time, Velázquez becomes a well-respected and trusted court painter. So let's take a look at it and talk about some of the details of the painting. The painting shows a large room in the palace during the reign of King Philip IV of Spain. He presents several figures, most identifiable from the Spanish court, captured, according to some commentators, in particular moments as if in a snapshot. So that's another sort of modern element, or this sort of ushering in of this sort of modernist style of painting that we think, where again, people are, it's not completely new. I mean, I think Giotto did this, and, I think the Mannerists were also doing this a little bit too, where they kind of crop the figures, and it really does look more like a snapshot. And the people sort of look like they're caught off guard. It definitely is not as formal a pose as you might expect from the royalty or from, court members in the aristocratic class. So that's one of the characteristics of Velázquez's work. Some of the figures look out of the canvas toward the viewer, almost like they're confronting us, confronting us and while others interact among themselves. So the young Infantata Margaret Teresa, and this is her right here, is surrounded by her entourage of maids, chaperones, bodyguards. There's a dwarf here and a dog in the foreground. So here's a detail of the painting and of the little girl. And hopefully one thing you might notice when you look at the painting, and something that I want you guys to start thinking about, when we talked about the Renaissance, we talked about two different styles of painting: disagonal, which is more of a linear style, and colorito, which was more of this building up of color. And definitely, can you sort of tell what Velázquez's technique might be? Hopefully you're thinking more along the lines of colorito. It's a little bit different, and we'll talk about it further. But definitely the brush strokes are much looser. We'll really zoom in and you can see. And so he really did have a very modern sort of brush stroke and painting style that he used in this painting. And one of the reasons why this painting is analyzed so much. So here is a more zoomed in detail of one of the maids. So you see this very loose painting style, and it's even more enhanced than what we saw with the Venetian artists in the colorito. I mean, look at that. I mean, these brush strokes are, we're not going to see anything like this or this style of painting again until the 19th century. So this really does show you how ahead of his time he really was. I mean, look at that, how he sort of blurred that line. So very different. And when you when you get close to the painting or the canvas, you can see these brush strokes. You can really see sort of the individualistic strokes and the sort of building up of paint that he used. But when you step away, it all sort of comes together and looks very real and natural. Here's a detail of the little girl. He also is playing with optical illusions and realism, and Velázquez understands the different subtle tonal ranges of light. He knew that lights and darks were not really placed next to each other in nature, and his style of painting appears very soft and almost expressionistic upon closer looks, but when again you step back, it looks like a photograph from the distance. So here you can see this effect here, the close-up of the girl, and you really do see sort of the softness of the brush strokes. And again, what they mean by this sort of, knowing that lights and darks aren't really placed next to each other. Light is basically in the idea of light reflecting off a subject, and that's what our eyes are really looking at when we look at something. It's the way light is reflecting off the subject. And so, depending on the lighting situation, it changes. And so he really was paying attention to the phenomenon of light and how it interacted on his subjects. So again, you really don't see black being used at all in this painting, or this sort of outlining, but very soft, built-up brush strokes. And then again, when you step back, it really comes together and looks like a very, realistic snapshot. What's also interesting about this painting is that it really documents, it's very historical in that we can look at this room, and in particular, let me go back. We're going to kind of focus on here. These are actual paintings that belong to the Spanish court, and the Spanish court kept accurate records of all their artwork and was really good at archiving. And so these were actually this was a real room, and these paintings have said to have hung in this room. And so, the painting is also beneficial for sort of this historical accuracy as well. So let me get to the paintings. So as I said before, the Spanish court had an excellent collection of art and kept excellent inventory of its collection. And these are supposed to be copies of Rubens. We haven't talked about him yet. We're going to talk about him later. and these were owned by the court. Because of this ID, historians have been able to pinpoint exactly what room Velázquez is painting in the palace. So here we'll look at the composition again. The dwarf in particular is a subject of fascination for some art historians. It was customary during this time for courts to sort of collect dwarfs at the time. And anyway, let's look at this whole composition. And I think, though, when you look at how she's portrayed, I think he, really does a good job of, giving her dignity. The way she's looking at us is very confident, and he's not presenting her as maybe an object of entertainment, as probably, the reason why courts would collect dwarfs. But he's really showing her as, a person, and very noble, and very self-aware of who she is. So I think that's one of the really positive aspects of Velázquez's painting. That even though he was a court painter and painting these sort of aristocratic citizens and royal, the royal Spanish court, he also gave quite admirable respect to lower court members and the genre and everyday people as well, and no matter what he was painting. So, looking at the bigger composition again, over to the left, you see this man here, and who do you think that is? Yes, it's Velázquez, and he portrays himself as a self-portrait of him working at a large canvas. So Velázquez also looks outwards, and he almost seems to be looking beyond the pictorial space, and almost seems to be looking where the viewer of this painting would stand. And so that's some of the ideas I talked about in the beginning, where he's playing around with these different types of illusion, or references to illusion and reality. All right. Looking closer, we'll talk about some of these other elements. Here, the man we see depicted in the doorway is the official key holder of the palace and unlocks doors for the royal couple to pass through. And so his presence in this painting signifies that the king is nearby. Also in the background, there's a mirror that reflects the upper bodies of the king and queen. They appear to be placed outside the picture space in a position similar to that of the viewer, although some scholars have speculated that their image is a reflection from the painting Velázquez is shown working on. So there's some ambiguity there. So, either way, he's still sort of playing with this idea of reality and illusion. And, for Velázquez, it really was important to be a well-respected court painter. And so this idea that he was painting for King Philip, and that the king would actually come and visit him in his studio, would be quite an honor for Velázquez. And also, really, speak volumes about his talent as an artist and painter. Another important detail to note when we look at a detail of the artist is the palette he's holding. Art historians have said that he's representing, there are only 4 colors, and from those 4 colors he's mixing all of the the different tones and the different other different colors that you see incorporated into the painting. So this was a way also for Velázquez to kind of show off his skill, and also the idea of the nobility of painting as well. Another detail that's important and also relates to the artist's identity is this red cross. This was the Order of Santiago, which was bestowed upon him by the king. And it's said that he actually painted this detail later on, after he had painted the composition. So again, this really is in tune with his identity as an artist and sort of elevating the idea of painting. And you still have to remember too that artists in the North, compared to artists in Italy, did not have as much respect as their Italian counterparts. And so this was a way for Velázquez to really raise the status of the artist and really raise the status of painting to more of a liberal art as well. So very innovative, very important. You must know this painting. And please watch the video from Khan Academy related to it as well. You should be watching all of them, but in particular, it really goes into great detail. About the symbolism, and again, I think they have some better images where you can really look at the detail of the brushstroke. So I'm going to stop here. We will be traveling to Flanders and looking at the art of Peter Paul Rubens next, and so stay tuned for that segment.